Cai Yong, Cai Wenji, Heng, and Wang. These four predominant poets and writers have some interesting stories surrounding them, from Heng getting naked in court to Cai Wenji being captured by the Xiongnu, or even Wang with his seemingly photographic memory. They earned great fame during their lives, and even after their deaths, with Wang's funeral involving a comedic and somewhat strange tribute. Cai Yong was by far the eldest, being born in the year 132. He was an astronomer, calligrapher, mathematician, musician, historian, politician, and writer, but was well versed in the first four occupations. He was born into an important family within Chen, and his ancestry is famed for not having their territory divided for 3 generations. His clan's prestige would go on to survive the coming years of war too, as one of his granddaughters would go on to become the 3rd wife of Sima Shi. Cai Yong's grandson and Cai Wenji's nephew, Yang Hu, had an auntie on his other side called Xin Xianying, the daughter of the outspoken and critical Xin Pi. Yong's early years were spent with his parents until they both passed away. When his father died, Yong and his mother went to live with their uncle. When her final 3 years came to pass, Cai Yong was recognised for the great care he had given her during his final moments. After this, Yong studied composition, mathematics, astronomy, pitch pipes and music under one of the highest-ranking officials in the Han Imperial Court of the time. In the early 160s, he was recommended to Emperor Huan by the senior eunuchs for his great skills with the drums and guqin, a 7-stringed instrument. As he would much rather be at home studying in solitude, he feigned an illness to get out of this duty and was able to live in seclusion for the next 10 years. In the 170s, he served as a clerk under the official Xiao Zuan, who was in awe of his abilities. Cai Yong soon became a county magistrate, then a consultant within the capital. His duties involved editing and collaborating the texts within the library. He became very well known here for his writing and was constantly commissioned to write eulogies, memorial inscriptions, and other important documents. Around this time, he gained a daughter in Chen who he named Cai Yan, also known as Cai Wenji. Originally, her courtesy name was Zhao Ji, but it was changed much later during the Jin dynasty to avoid the naming taboo with Sima Zhao, the father of the Jin dynasty's founding emperor, Sima Yan. Heng, sometimes read as Heng, was born around 173 in Pingyuan Commandery and had no notable family members. Wang was born a few years later in the year 177 at Shanyang Commandery. Being born to a family of high-ranking officials who were once among the 3 excellencies, and with his father being a chief clerk of He Jin, Wang grew up in the capital city of Luoyang. In the coming years, Cai Yong became uneasy as he suspected certain groups of altering the Confucian classics to support their own views. In 175, he gathered some scholars together to petition for the 5 classics to be etched in stone. Emperor Ling approved of this idea, which resulted in the Ziping stone classics, named after the Ziping era of Emperor Ling's reign. These stone-carved books took 8 years to complete and set the canon for future generations. Yong would often criticize the eunuchs for how they meddled and influenced the imperial court, whilst advocating for ceremonial practices to be restored. He managed to convince Ling to perform a ritual in the winter of 177, but his arguments against the eunuchs fell on deaf ears. 1 year after the ritual, the scholars were asked for information regarding recent ill omens. Cai Yong criticized the eunuchs' pretentious behavior and blamed them for the coming changes. When the eunuchs found out what he had said, they framed Cai Yong and his uncle, Cai Ji, for extortion, then had them thrown in prison to await execution. Eventually their sentence was reduced and they were spared, but exiled to the northern frontiers where life was much harsher. After 9 months, Cai Yong wrote to the throne that his work which cited the dynastic histories and their classics was at risk of being destroyed. This allowed him to relocate back to the capital, but upon returning and attending a banquet, he offended a child of one of the influential eunuchs, which once more pitted him against their faction. Too smart to await an ill fate, Cai Yong fled south to Wu and spent the next 12 years in Quaji Commandery. Dongzhuo seized the capital and put Emperor Xian on the throne in the year 189, when Wang was only 13 years old. Cai Yong was summoned back to the capital by Dongzhuo, and to avoid the chaos, Heng fled to Jing province to serve under Liu Biao. Cai Yong wanted to refuse service, but Dong warned him that he could eliminate whole clans, which gave Yong no choice but to comply. He was appointed Lieutenant General of the Household, and was in charge of revising the rituals for Dongzhuo's new government. Cai feared Dongzhuo's temper and still wanted to escape, but was convinced that he was too famous to disappear without people noticing. He was also admired by Dongzhuo, who appreciated him as a scholar and a musician. The next year, the capital was relocated to Chang'an. Wang Can, at 14, headed to his new home and settled down for the next 3 years. During this time, Cai Yong recognized Wang Can's talents and chose him to be his prodigy. Cai recommended Wang Can to the imperial court, so he received many invitations, but he refused them all. An anecdote exists where a young Wang Can went to visit Cai Yong, who was hosting many guests of exalted rank. He rushed to greet Wang Can, even wearing his shoes the wrong way in his haste. When the guests asked why he acted this way, Yong replied, "He is a young man with the highest gifts, which I cannot match. I shall grant him all the books and essays in my home." Within the records of the Three Kingdoms, it states that Wang Can was widely read and had a most retentive memory, better than any of his contemporaries. If he glanced at a roadside monument as he passed, he remembered every word of the inscription. If he saw people playing weishi and the board was suddenly disturbed, he could replace every piece in its correct place. In 192, Dongzhuo was killed in a plot by Wang Yun and Lu Bu. As Cai Yong was seen expressing grief at Dongzhuo's passing, he was once again imprisoned and sentenced to death. Despite many officials pleading with Wang Yun to allow Cai to finish his work on the history of the Han, he did not allow it. His reasons were thus. In ancient times, Emperor Wu failed to kill Sima Xian, and so allowed him to write a book of slander which was passed down to later times. Particularly at this time, as the fortunes of the emperor are in decline and there are no war horses in the suburbs, we cannot allow a treacherous minister to hold his brush against the attendants to our young emperor. It offers no advantage to the sage virtue of the ruler, and will cause our party to suffer contempt and abuse. Cai Yong tragically died in prison without finishing his craft. Wang Yun went on to regret this decision, and had pictures set up to honour him, as well as having commemorative eulogies composed throughout Chen Liu Commandery. Cai Wenji's husband of the time was also killed in this same year, so perhaps they shared the same fate, although there is no evidence to support this. Cai Yong had entrusted the bulk of his library to Wang Can. It's through Wang Can's collection that Cai Yong's works can be found in compilations like the Book of the Later Han. His contributions include the editing of the Ziping Stone Classics, a piece on ceremonies, a text regarding pharmacology, a text with advice for women, instructions on how to play the guxin, and a piece of text on the aspects of the traditional seal script. By 194, Wang Can had made his way to Jing province to serve Liu Biao, but he didn't favour him as Wang looked pale and sickly. Between 194 and 195, Cai Wenji was kidnapped by the Xiongnu nomads that took advantage of this warring period to intrude into Han territory. She was captured and taken back to the northern lands for the next 12 years. As a captive, she married a chieftain titled the Wise Prince of the Left. Serving alongside the Worthy Prince of the Right, they acted as two subdivisions of the Xiongnu main domain. Around a year after her capture, Heng moved north to join the new imperial court that Tao had set up in Zhu City. One source says he moved north to join Tao, but another mentions that Heng had a low opinion of him. Perhaps he was curious to meet Tao at first, but later changed his mind. Although Heng was a gifted poet and talented writer, he was also erratic and offensive. Many people questioned his sanity, and he was difficult to work and socialize with. This became apparent after Wang recommended him to Tao, who was glad to meet with him. Heng, however, refused, but Tao forgave him despite being angry about it, and even arranged for another meeting. Heng was also invited to perform his talents on the drums at a banquet and to wear a special garment. When he arrived in the wrong attire and was scolded for it, it specifically recorded that he slowly stripped, stood naked in front of Tao and the other guests for a few moments, then slowly put the clothes back on. He showed no embarrassment as he done this. Wang helped arrange for the second meeting with Tao, but Heng was just as offensive on that occasion as well. After this, he was sent back to Liu Biao. This new arrangement only lasted around a year though. Heng was respected among Liu Biao's court, but he didn't return the praise. He criticised Liu Biao for being indecisive, which offended most of Liu's other attendants. He was then sent to Jiangxia Commandery to serve under Huangzu, where initially he impressed his new lord and his son. It was only a matter of time though until he insulted Huangzu in front of all of his officers at a banquet. When Huangzu ordered for his execution, one of his senior clerks who hated Heng happily carried out the task. When Liu Biao passed away in the year 208, Wang Can successfully helped persuade Liu Kong to hand over Jing province to Cao Cao, whereafter Wang Can applied his talents to Cao's administration from here on. 1 year prior to this, though, Cao had paid a heavy ransom for the safe return of Cai Wenji. Sources claim the reason Cao did this was because she was the sole survivor of her clan, and he needed her to placate the spirits of her ancestors. However, in accordance to other historic records, Cai Yong had at least 2 daughters and maybe a son. The other daughter would go on to become an empress dowager of the Jin dynasty and married a few notable figures. Historians argue that if one of these was not able to placate the spirits, then Cai Wenji would not be able to either, as females could not carry on the family name. It's thought that the real reason Cao gave that excuse was to convince the Han officials to pay the expensive ransom. After she was freed, she returned to her homeland, but had to leave her children behind. She remarried to a local official from her hometown called Dongsi, but he committed a capital crime later on. She went to Cao to plead for his release whilst he was busy hosting a banquet. The entertained guests were stirred by her distressed appearance and behaviour as she asked Cao if he could provide her with a new husband. Cao pardoned Dongsi after this, and in the years to come, Cai Wenji inherited some 4,000 volumes of ancient books from her father's vast collection. They were destroyed in the ravages of war, so at Cao's request, Cai recited 400 of them from memory and wrote them on paper. She wrote 2 poems describing her turbulent years, which were noted for their sorrowful tone and have been classed within the Jianan style of poetry. A famous Guxin piece called 18 Songs of a Nomad Flute is traditionally attributed to her, but the authorship has become a topic of heated debate. An excerpt in 5-character form from the poem of sorrow and anger. My dwelling is often covered by frost and snow. The foreign winds bring again spring and summer. They gently blow into my robes and chillingly shrill into my ear. Emotion stirred, I think of my parents, whilst I draw a long sigh of endless sorrows. Whenever guests visit from afar, I would often make joy of their tidings. I lost no time in throwing eager questions, only to find that the guests were not from my hometown. Cai Wenji's stories of sorrow inspired later artists to keep portraying her past. Her return to the Han lands has been a subject of numerous paintings titled Cai Wenji's Return to Her Homeland. Wang Can's abilities flourished under Cao's administration, along with 6 other poets of his time, who is coined as one of the 7 scholars of Jianan by Cao Pi. One history book Wang Can wrote is the record of late Han heroes. It contains various stories of late Han warlords, but the book has since been lost to history. The surviving accounts are taken from Pei Songji's annotations to the records. The stories are clearly defined by year, one such being, in the 208 in the middle of the Battle of Red Cliff, Cao tried to cross the Yangtze River by connecting lots of rafts. However, as Shou delivered fire attacks on it, Cao had to retreat. Some argue that Wang Can could not have included late Han in his book, as Emperor Xian was still on the throne when it was written. Others counter this with the fact that the Han Empire was clearly facing its demise. Also, as Wang had once described Cao as a holy ruler in his poem of military service, we cannot say with full certainty that Wang Can did not put late Han in the title. In the year 213, Cao was made a duke, and was granted 10 cities for his dukedom. Wang Can was tasked with establishing a new system of laws and standards to replace the old ones which had become mostly obsolete. That same year, Cao marched south and attacked Rushu in his 4th invasion of Wu, but Lu Meng held off the attacks for about a month and Cao had to pull back in the end. On the way back to Yi City, Wang Can fell ill and slowly got weaker over the next few years. In 217 he passed away. When Cao Pi attended his funeral, he told the guests, when he was still living, Wang Can loved the sounds of a donkey braying, so let's each make a braying sound as a farewell to him. Everyone did just that. Both of Wang Can's sons were executed 2 years later for joining in with some rebels against Wei. Their resulting deaths exterminated Wang's family line. Eventually, a younger relative named Wang Yi was designated to be Wang Can's adopted son and carry on the lineage. Wang Yi inherited 10,000 books, and then passed them on to his own sons, Wang Bi and Wang Hong. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.